The cafeteria at Lincoln Elementary buzzed with the chatter of children, trays clattering and sneakers squeaking against the polished floor. To anyone else, it might have felt alive and inviting, but to Nathan Turner, it was a battlefield. The 6-year-old stood at the end of the lunch line, clutching his tray with trembling hands, his thin arms working hard to balance the weight while his crutches dug into his armpits. Each step was careful, deliberate, the way a tightrope walker might test a wire before trusting it with their life. His legs, weakened by muscular dystrophy, trembled under him, and every child who passed seemed to notice. They looked, whispered, and then looked away as if his weakness might be catching. When Nathan moved toward a table, children instinctively shuffled their trays, closing gaps, filling spaces, pretending the seats were taken. "Sorry, these are saved," one boy said, smirking even though the chair sat empty. Nathan swallowed the lump in his throat and nodded politely, as though he believed the lie. He turned to another table, only to be dismissed again, his knuckles whitened around the grips of his crutches, his heart sinking further with each rejection. The laughter of his classmates carried easily over the noise, some stifled behind hands, others loud and unashamed. To them, he wasn't Nathan. He was the rich kid with broken legs, the one whose billionaire father gave the school new computers, but couldn't buy his son a normal body. Mrs. Clarkson, the cafeteria monitor, watched from her station near the door, her brow furrowing. She took a step forward, then stopped, her lips pressed tight. Nobody wanted to be the one to scold the children of wealthy donors. The Turner name carried weight, and with it, silence. Nathan's tray wobbled dangerously as he moved toward the corner table. His legs shook harder than usual, the strain of rejection wearing him down. He tried to set the tray on the table, but as he shifted his crutch, his right one slid across a puddle of spilled milk that had gone unnoticed. In an instant, the world seemed to tip. His tray shot upward, macaroni and cheese and green beans scattering like confetti. Chocolate milk arced across the air, splattering onto the floor. Nathan crashed down hard, his crutches clattering beside him, his fragile body sprawled in the mess. For a single breath, the cafeteria went silent. Then came the explosion of laughter. "Look at Rich Boy now." Tommy Peterson's voice rose above the rest, sharp with cruelty. Nathan's cheeks burned hot, his eyes stinging as he tried to push himself up. But his legs folded uselessly beneath him. He reached for his crutches, but they lay just out of reach, mocking him. He felt smaller than ever, surrounded by jeers, drowning in humiliation. Then a different sound cut through the noise, a soft, steady voice, not loud, but certain. "I got you." A girl with tangled brown hair and a shirt to sizes the big knelt beside him, her thin knees pressing into the puddle of milk. She gently set his crutches upright and held one out to him. Her hands were small, but they didn't shake. Her sneakers had holes at the toes, her jeans were patched at both knees, and her face bore the tired determination of someone who had learned to survive being overlooked. "I'm Lucy," she said, her tone matter of fact, like she was promising him more than help in that moment. She gathered the scattered food, not caring that her fingers smeared with cheese or that milk dampened her sleeve. Nathan stared at her, startled. Nobody ever stepped forward for him, not like this. Around them, the laughter faltered, curiosity overtaking mockery. Lucy ignored it all. She placed his tray back on the table and helped steady him as he pulled himself upright. Her eyes met his, steady and kind, and for the first time in months, Nathan felt something stir inside him that money and medicine had failed to provide. He smiled, tentative, small, but real. Unnoticed by the children, a tall figure stood at the cafeteria doorway. Richard Turner, dressed in a sharp suit that seemed out of place among the smell of mashed potatoes and bleach, watched with an unreadable expression. His driver had called him about an incident, and he had come bracing for tears, for another reminder of what his son couldn't do. Instead, he saw something far more unexpected, his fragile boy smiling at a little girl with patched clothes. Richard's grip tightened on the phone in his hand, his jaw set. For the first time in years, the billionaire, who thought he could control everything, was silent, conflicted, and unsure of what came next. The morning light crept through the high windows of the West Side shelter, throwing pale streaks across rows of narrow beds. Lucy Williams stirred before the sun had fully risen, her small body curled under a blanket to thin for the early autumn chill. She blinked awake, instinctively checking that her backpack was still under her head, her treasure chest. holding a pencil stub, a tattered notebook, and the last photo of her mother before life unraveled. Around her, the muffled snores of other children filled the room, but Lucy had already trained herself to wake early, to move before the chaos of the day began. Survival meant being invisible, and invisibility started with quiet steps. Her mother, Diane, was already at the door, her diner uniform neat despite its frayed collar. She bent to kiss Lucy's forehead. "Be good at school today, Luce," she whispered, using the nickname only she dared say. "This job might be the one. 6 steady months, and maybe we can get a place of our own." Lucy nodded, though deep down she had heard promises like this before. Still, she wanted to believe, for her mother's sake more than her own dot at school. Lucy blended in as best she could. Her patched jeans and worn sneakers marked her instantly, but she had learned to lower her gaze, to walk as if she carried no secrets. She sat quietly through morning lessons, her mind only half on the chalkboard. Her thoughts drifted to the boy from yesterday, the boy with the careful smile, the boy everyone avoided, the boy who looked at her not with pity, but with gratitude. Nathan Turner, asterisk at recess, she found him sitting alone on a bench, his crutches leaning beside him, his small hands folded in his lap as he watched other kids run and shout. "Hi," Lucy said, standing before him. Nathan looked up quickly, surprise flickering across his face. Most children never came near unless they wanted to laugh. He gave a cautious smile. "Hi," he answered. Lucy sat down beside him without asking. A bold move that made Nathan's heart beat faster. He wasn't used to anyone choosing his company. For a moment, they watched the playground in silence. Then Nathan said quietly, "They don't like me much." Lucy shrugged, picking at a loose thread in her shirt. "They don't like me either." "That's okay. Means we can like each other." Nathan studied her, puzzled. "Why don't they like you?" Lucy's eyes flicked down, her voice low. "They think I'm different, and different scares people." She didn't explain further. She wouldn't tell him about the shelter, about the night she went to bed hungry, about the way she clutched her backpack like a lifeline. But Nathan, sensing something unspoken, didn't press. Instead, he nodded slowly. "I know how that feels." They talked then, halting at first, but with growing ease. Nathan told her about his mother, how she used to sing him to sleep until she got sick and never sang again. His voice cracked when he said it, but Lucy didn't laugh or look away. She just listened. Then she told him about her dream, a little house with windows that didn't leak, and a door that locked, a place where she and her mom could just belong. Nathan, quiet for a moment, whispered, "Maybe one day you'll have that." Lucy gave him a half smile, the kind that hid more pain than it showed, unseen by either child. Richard Turner's black sedan pulled up outside the school. He had come to check on Nathan, restless after yesterday's incident. From the car window, he watched his son and the girl talk on the bench. His brow furrowed. The principal had told him her name, Lucy Williams, and her situation: temporary housing, no father. Mother working at the diner. A shelter kid, asterisk. Richard's chest tightened. His instincts screamed to intervene, to protect his son from pain, from disappointment, from connections that might vanish overnight. But then Nathan laughed, a sound so rare that Richard almost didn't recognize it. He leaned back in the leather seat, unsettled. He had spent millions chasing experimental treatments, desperate to give his son strength. Yet here was a ragged little girl giving Nathan something priceless. With nothing more than her presence, Richard clenched his jaw. He told himself it was just a passing friendship, a fluke. But in the back of his mind, he couldn't silence the question, what if this girl, this child with nothing, was giving his son what all his billions could not? As the school bell rang, Lucy and Nathan rose together, his crutches steady under his arms, her hand hovering near, ready to help if he stumbled. And Richard Turner, watching them disappear into the building, realized he was witnessing the beginning of something that would unravel the very foundations of his carefully controlled life. Asterisk. Richard Turner sat in the high-backed leather chair of his office, the skyline of Boston glowing behind him. But his mind was not on quarterly earnings or the engineers waiting to present a new prototype. His mind was on a 7-year-old girl with tangled hair and shoes worn through at the toes. The image of Lucy sitting beside Nathan on that playground bench played in his head again and again. His son's laugh echoed there, too light, unguarded. The kind of laugh Richard hadn't heard since his wife's funeral. Asterisk. It unsettled him, and Richard Turner was not a man easily unsettled. He had built his empire on controlling markets, controlling negotiations, controlling outcomes. But this friendship between his fragile boy and a homeless girl, it was something he could neither predict nor manage. He ordered a quiet investigation. His assistant returned 2 days later with a slim folder. Lucy Williams, 7 years old, no father listed. Mother, Diane Williams, 31, worked double shifts at a downtown diner. Current residence, West Side Shelter. Richard read the words without expression, but inside, his thoughts whirled. The shelter was notorious, barely funded, overrun with families struggling to survive. Was this really the world his son's only friend came from? He closed the folder with a snap and pushed it aside. He told himself this was dangerous. Attachment to someone unstable, someone who might vanish overnight, could break Nathan's already delicate spirit. Yet that evening, over dinner, Nathan's eyes lit up for the first time in months. Lucy taught me how to play checkers at recess, he said, grinning at his father. She said I'm good even though I lost every game. She said I don't give up easy. Richard's fork paused halfway to his mouth. He had never seen his son speak of anyone with such admiration. Dad, Nathan added, voice softer now, Lucy makes me forget my legs don't work right. Richard put his fork down slowly, his appetite gone. He had spent fortunes trying to erase that pain, to buy moments of normalcy for his boy. But this child, this girl with nothing, was giving it away freely. The next week, the storm came. It began in whispers at school, the kind children are cruelly skilled at spreading. She lives in a shelter. She wears the same shirt twice a week. By Friday, the whispers became jeers. At lunch, Tommy Peterson, the loudest of them all, sneered as Lucy and Nathan carried their trays to the corner table. Careful, Turner, Tommy called out, his voice sharp with mockery. Your girlfriend might steal your lunch. That's what shelter kids do, right? Beg and steal. Laughter erupted, sharp and cruel, bouncing off the cafeteria walls. Nathan's face turned red, his hands tightening around his crutches. But his legs quivered too much for him to stand against the crowd. Lucy froze. For a heartbeat, shame pricked her eyes, but then something fierce rose in her. She set her tray down, stepped forward, and stared Tommy down. At least I don't pick on people weaker than me, she said, her voice steady, though her hands trembled at her sides. Tommy smirked, circling her. What do you have, Lucy? Ripped shoes? A mom who flips burgers. You don't belong here. The cafeteria grew quiet, waiting for Lucy to shrink, to back away. Instead, she bent, picked up Nathan's fallen crutch from under the table, and placed it firmly in his hands. He's stronger than you'll ever be, she said, her eyes blazing. Because strength isn't about legs or money, it's about heart. And you don't have one. For a moment, even Tommy was silenced. Nathan, pale but resolute, sat straighter, his small hand gripping the crutch like a sword. The teachers rushed in then, breaking the tension, scolding Tommy, ushering children back to their seats. But the moment had already burned itself in the memory of the homeless girl, who stood taller than the school's most arrogant bully. What Lucy didn't see was the figure standing just outside the cafeteria doors. Richard Turner had arrived early, intending to pull Nathan from school after another sleepless night worrying about the friendship. Instead, he stood frozen, watching his son's protector face down a room full of children without flinching. For the second time in a week, Lucy Williams had left him speechless. And for the first time in his life, Richard Turner, a man who thought money could solve anything, wondered if the real wealth he had been searching for was standing right there in the form of a homeless little girl with patched jeans and an unshakable spirit. The rain fell in thin, silvery sheets over Boston that evening, washing the city in a melancholy glow. Richard Turner sat alone in the back of his limousine, his tie loosened, his mind restless. He should have been reviewing merger contracts, preparing for a call with investors in Tokyo. But instead, he stared at the raindrops streaking down the glass. All day, the image of Lucy Williams had haunted him, the way she had stood in that cafeteria, fearless in the face of ridicule, lifting Nathan's crutch like it was a banner of defiance. That night, something in Richard snapped. He tapped the divider. Take me to the West Side Shelter. The driver's eyes flickered in the mirror, surprised. But he said nothing and steered the car away from the glittering skyscrapers, toward the forgotten edges of the city. The limousine felt absurdly out of place as it rolled past crumbling buildings and graffiti-stained walls. Richard adjusted his cufflinks, the gesture automatic. But for once, he felt no comfort in the armor of wealth. The shelter was a squat, peeling brick building with broken blinds in its windows. The sign out front flickered weakly, a single bulb buzzing against the rain. Richard hesitated as he stepped out, the damp chill seeping through his expensive shoes. The air smelled of wet asphalt, old trash, and faintly of soup. Inside. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, illuminating rows of weary faces. Families huddled in corners, children clutching threadbare stuffed animals. Volunteers ladling out watery stew. Richard had walked the halls of Silicon Valley's greatest labs, had dined with presidents and prime ministers, but nothing had ever made him feel so out of place. Then he saw her, Lucy, hair pulled back into a messy braid, her jeans patched and frayed, was balancing the paper cups of soup as she carefully handed one to a younger boy with no shoes. She gave him a smile, small but genuine, and only after he slurped gratefully did she take her own. Her hands shook from hunger, but she still gave away the larger portion. Richard's throat tightened. His son's best friend lived like this? This girl who had nothing still gave more than most adults he knew. A voice broke his thoughts. Mr. Turner? He turned to see Diane Williams, Lucy's mother. She wore the diner uniform, her eyes shadowed with exhaustion, her hands red from scrubbing. For a moment she looked startled, then wary. Why are you here? Richard cleared his throat, suddenly uncertain. I wanted to see where Lucy lives. Diane's expression hardened. If this is about Nathan, I need you to understand we don't take handouts. Lucy's not a charity project. Her words hit him like a blow. He opened his mouth to protest, but Diane continued, her voice quiet but firm. We're not broken, Mr. Turner. We're just trying to stand. That's all. For a long moment, Richard said nothing. He had expected desperation, pleas for help. Instead, he found dignity, raw and unyielding. He inclined his head, almost like a bow, then turned back to the sight of Lucy helping the boy with his soup. When he left, the rain had stopped, but the air felt different. For years he had believed strength was measured in power, in the size of his empire, in the number of lives his fortune touched. But tonight, he had seen another kind of strength. A girl with patched jeans refusing to let her poverty define her. A mother clinging to dignity in the face of ruined. As the limousine pulled away, Richard's reflection in the window looked older, wearier, and for the first time, he wondered if his billions had blinded him to what truly mattered. Back at the shelter, Lucy curled up on her narrow cot, unaware of the storm she had stirred in the heart of a billionaire. But fate was already moving, setting into motion events that would test not just Nathan's fragile body, but the courage of all three lives tangled together. The weeks that followed carried with them a quiet heaviness that neither Nathan nor Lucy could ignore. Winter crept closer, and with it, the cold mornings made Nathan's muscles lock up more than usual. His legs, already frail from muscular dystrophy, seemed weaker by the day. What once had been difficult standing, walking with crutches was now becoming impossible. The doctors had warned Richard that this day would come, but warnings were only words until reality crashed down in front of you. It happened one morning at school. Nathan tried to walk from the classroom to the cafeteria. Halfway down the hallway, his legs buckled completely. His crutches slipped from his hands and clattered against the floor, the sound echoing through the corridor. He fell hard, the breath knocked from his chest. For a terrible moment, he just lay there, staring at the ceiling tiles as tears blurred his vision. Children nearby snickered. Others pretended not to see. But Lucy didn't hesitate. She was at his side in seconds, sliding her arms under his shoulders, helping him sit upright. I'm fine, Nathan whispered, though his voice trembled with shame. No, you're not, Lucy said firmly. She bent, picked up his crutches, and held them out. But that doesn't mean you're less. Nathan looked at her, his eyes wet. He wanted to believe her words, but the truth sat heavy in his chest. He was losing what little independence he had. That night, Richard carried him into the mansion, his son limp in his arms, his heart breaking at the weightlessness of the boy who once had been so full of laughter. For the first time, Nathan had to use a wheelchair at home. The change ate at him. He grew distant, refusing Lucy's offers to play, turning away from her bright smile. You don't understand, he snapped one day at recess. I can't even stand anymore. I'm just a burden. Lucy's face fell, but she didn't walk away. She sat down on the bench beside him, her voice quiet but steady. Friends don't need legs to stand beside each other, Nathan. They just stay, and I'm staying. Her words planted a seed in his heart. but shame still wrapped around him like chains. The climax came during the school's winter assembly. Parents, teachers, and donors filled the auditorium. On stage, the principal beamed about the generosity of Richard Turner, praising his donations that had built the library and funded the new science lab. Applause thundered through the hall. Nathan sat in his wheelchair off to the side, shrinking into himself. Beside him, Lucy clapped politely, but her eyes flicked to her friend, noticing how small he looked in the shadow of his father's reputation. And then something inside Nathan shifted. He could no longer sit still, no longer watch while the world saw only his father's wealth and not the courage of the girl beside him. With trembling arms, he wheeled himself forward, the microphone catching the squeak of his chair. The room stilled. "The bravest person I know," Nathan said, his small voice cracking but clear. "Isn't my dad, even though he's a billionaire?" "It's Lucy." Gasps swept across the room. Teachers looked at each other in shock. Parents whispered. On the stage, the principal froze, his practiced smile faltering. Nathan continued, his face burning but his eyes shining. "She helped me when everyone else laughed. She made me feel like I wasn't broken. She's my best friend, and she's stronger than anyone here." Lucy sat frozen, her heart pounding in her chest. She had spent years trying to be invisible, to hide her poverty and her pain. But here, under the bright stage lights, Nathan's words pulled her into the spotlight she had never wanted. Richard Turner sat in the front row, his heart hammering. He had expected this assembly to be about his achievements, his money. Instead, his son was giving everything his dignity, his voice to honor a homeless girl. And for the second time in as many weeks, Richard Turner, master of empires, found himself humbled by a child's truth. The applause that followed was hesitant at first, then grew stronger, filling the hall. But behind the clapping hands and forced smiles, Richard sensed something deeper stirring a tide that would not be stopped. Something had shifted tonight, not just for Nathan, but for Lucy too. The billionaire realized with a chill that their lives were now entwined in ways neither money nor power could untangle. And in that entanglement lay both hope and danger. Asterisk, the night after the assembly was one Richard Turner would never forget. The auditorium still echoed in his mind, Nathan's small voice breaking through years of silence, declaring Lucy as his hero. It should have filled Richard with pride, but instead it left him restless, pacing the marble floors of his mansion while the rain battered the windows. His empire had been built on keeping control, on orchestrating outcomes. Yet now his son's happiness, his very will to fight, was tied to a child who had no safety net, no guarantees, nothing but a fragile life balanced on the edge of poverty. The storm inside Richard's heart only grew when he looked in on Nathan. His boy was sitting up in bed, eyes bright despite the weakness in his body. He clutched a drawing Lucy had given him to stick figures holding hands under a crooked sun. "She's my best friend, Dad," Nathan whispered before drifting to sleep. Richard stood frozen at the door, humble. This girl who owned nothing had given his son more than all the wealth he had poured into doctors, specialists, and machines. But the world wasn't kind to girls like Lucy, and Richard knew it. He had lived long enough in boardrooms and political circles to know how cruelly society could strip dignity from those with nothing. The thought of Nathan watching Lucy suffer broke something inside him. The next day, Richard returned to the shelter. He found Diane Williams mopping the cracked tile floors, exhaustion etched deep into her face. "You again," she said, straightening, her eyes wary. Richard hesitated. This wasn't a negotiation table, and she wasn't a rival CEO, but he forced the words out. "I want to help, not charity, something lasting." Diane shook her head. "We don't need saving. We just need a chance to stand on our own." "Then let me give you that chance," Richard replied, his voice harder now. "Because if you fall, my son falls with you." Diane's lips parted, shock flickering across her face. For the first time, she saw not a billionaire flexing his power, but a father terrified, vulnerable, desperate. She said nothing, but the silence between them spoke louder than words at school. The storm Lucy had feared finally came. Children whispered louder now, emboldened by what they had heard at the assembly. "Charity case," they hissed in hallways. "Shelter girl," someone scrawled it on her locker in chalk. The shame she had buried for years clawed its way to the surface. That afternoon, as she left the building, she found Nathan waiting by the steps in his wheelchair. He looked at her with quiet determination. "Don't let them make you small," he said. "You're the reason I still fight." But Lucy, her eyes wet, shook her head. Maybe you'd be better off without me. Everyone's laughing at you because of me. Nathan's small hands tightened on his wheels. Lucy, he said, his voice trembling, before you, I felt invisible. Now, I don't care if they laugh, because you make me see myself again. His words struck her like a lightning bolt. She had spent her life believing invisibility was safety. But here was a boy in a chair teaching her that visibility could be strength. She sank to her knees, hugging him, the world spinning around them. Cruel laughter drowned by the pounding of her own heart. Asterisk that evening, Richard stood at his office window, staring at the lights of the city. He had made billions by calculating risk, by predicting markets. But this bond between his son and Lucy was the one investment that terrified him most, because it was the one he could not control. He understood now that he faced a choice: pull Lucy and Diane out of Nathan's world, to protect his son from the uncertainty of their lives, or step into their chaos and let it change him to dot. And as the night deepened, Richard realized that his decision would alter not just Nathan's fragile future, but his own legacy forever. Asterisk the snow had begun to fall across Boston, soft flakes drifting down over the city like fragile promises. Lincoln Elementary buzzed with excitement as children prepared for the holiday break. But for Nathan Turner, the season brought more weight than joy. His legs had now given up completely. The wheelchair was no longer temporary, it was permanent. Yet, beside him, Lucy walked with her usual quiet defiance, daring anyone to laugh at him. Their bond had grown stronger through whispers, mockery, and cruel jokes. But the question that loomed over them both was whether the world would allow that bond to last. Richard Turner knew he could no longer delay his decision. For weeks he had watched his son come alive again, laughing, smiling, telling stories with Lucy. For weeks he had watched Lucy give Nathan a strength no medical treatment or money could buy. But he had also seen the stares, the sneers, the sideways glances from other parents. Their whispers carried the same sting. Why is the billionaire's son mixing with a shelter girl? Asterisk the night of the school's winter gala was when everything reached its breaking point. The auditorium was filled with parents in glittering dresses and tailored suits. The mayor was there, the school board, even the governor's wife. Richard sat in the front row, his presence alone enough to silence conversations. Nathan sat beside him in his wheelchair, and Lucy sat quietly at the edge of the row, her patched jeans stark against the polished shoes and gowns. When the principal took the stage to thank donors, the applause was thunderous for Richard Turner. But when Nathan wheeled himself forward, demanding the microphone again, the room shifted. I want to thank my dad, Nathan said, his voice trembling. But I also want to thank someone else. The bravest person I know is Lucy Williams. She's my best friend. She's my family. The auditorium went silent. All eyes on the ragged little girl at the end of the row. Lucy's face turned red, and she wanted to disappear. But Nathan's hand reached out to her, steady and sure, pulling her into the light. The whispers began immediately. The shelter girl? Unbelievable. Richard Turner's son, best friends with her. Asterisk Richard's jaw tightened as he listened. His instinct had always been to shield Nathan, to control the narrative, to silence anything that threatened his son. But as he looked at Nathan's determined face, at Lucy's trembling but unbroken stance, something inside him hardened. He rose to his feet. Enough, Richard said, his voice carrying across the hall. The room stilled instantly. Everyone knew the weight his words carried. He walked onto the stage, placed his hands on Nathan's wheelchair, and looked out at the crowd. My son is right. Strength isn't about money or power. It's about courage. And this girl has more courage than most men I've ever met in boardrooms or governments. A murmur rippled through the audience. Some were shocked, some angry, but others, teachers, students, even a few parents, clapped hesitantly. The sound grew, small at first, then louder. But Richard wasn't finished. Asterisk he turned toward Lucy and Diane, who had slipped into the back of the hall after her shift at the diner. From this night forward, Richard declared, Lucy and her mother will never live in a shelter again. Not because I pity them, but because they have shown me what true strength looks like. Diane Williams will head a new foundation funded by Turner Industries to help families like hers. And Lucy, his voice broke slightly, and for once the billionaire let the humanity show. Lucy will grow up with my son as family. Gasps filled the room. Diane's hands flew to her mouth, tears spilling down her cheeks. Lucy stood frozen, her wide eyes locked on Nathan, who grinned through his tears. The applause that followed was different this time. Not polite, not forced. It was raw, loud, and real. Teachers stood first, then parents, then even children joined, clapping until the room thundered. Richard bent down to his son and whispered, "You were right, Nathan. She makes you stronger. She makes us stronger." Lucy, unable to hold back anymore, ran to Nathan's side, throwing her arms around him. For the first time in her life, she wasn't invisible. She wasn't the shelter girl, the charity case, the forgotten child. She was Lucy Williams, the girl who had taught a billionaire what wealth truly meant. And as the snow continued to fall outside the glowing auditorium, 3 lives once broken in different ways were being stitched together into something new, something powerful. Nathan no longer smiled alone. Lucy no longer dreamed of a home with windows that didn't leak. And Richard Turner, for the first time in decades, felt like a man who was finally rich.